Well, welcome, folks. Again, my name is Martin Sorge. I'm Executive Director of Uptown United and the Uptown Chamber of Commerce. You are tuning in to our first webinar in a series, and this one is about what is affordable housing. So thank you for joining us today. Just a little bit about us, for those who don't know Uptown United. We are the nonprofit community and economic development organization that serves Chicago's awesome Uptown neighborhood, along with the Uptown Chamber of Commerce. We have a mission to build a strong, unified business environment, facilitate economic development, and strengthen community, all to nurture a diverse, vibrant, thriving, and strong Uptown. So if you don't know about us, head to our website at exploreuptown.org to learn more. Like I mentioned, this is the first in a series of 4 webinars that we decided to do this year. That focus on some of the most discussed topics that we have around real estate and development issues in our neighborhood. So the goal of each webinar is to hear from practitioners, scholars, and experts around these complicated topics. So the first one in the series is today about affordable housing, but we hope you tune into the other webinars in the series. So tonight, we really hope to cover a few things. First, an overview about what affordable housing means, how affordable housing gets preserved and built, some statistics about affordable housing in Uptown and in Chicago, and then learn some more about affordable home ownership. If you have questions for any of our panelists, please type them into the Q&A feature on Zoom. Hopefully we'll get to the questions either during your questions will be answered during the presentation. If not, we're going to take some go through Q&A at the end of the presentation. And please address your questions to the folks here presenting. You'll notice we don't have any elected officials or city officials on the panel, so please direct your questions to any of our experts that volunteered their time tonight. And then just wanted to give a huge thank you to Tony Mills, who is our moderator tonight. And also thank you to Tony and Sarah Jacobson on our board of directors who helped us plan this evening, and our awesome panelists. So we'll go around in a minute and introduce them. And we'll stop sharing so we can see everyone's face and go around the room and do introductions, just starting with Tony.
I was double muted, so sorry about that. My name is Antonia Mills. I go by Tony. I am a residential real estate law attorney who specializes in working with real estate investors, and I have my practice here in Uptown.
And Rafael?
Rafael?
Yeah, I'm Rafael Leon. I'm the Executive Director of CMHDC, which stands for Chicago Metropolitan Housing Development Corporation. It's a very, very long name, so most people know it as CMHDC. We are a nonprofit housing development corporation providing affordable rentals throughout the metropolitan area. And I'll get into a little bit more details when I make my presentation about the organization and how we operate within the affordable housing industry.
Great, Jeff.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Jeff Smith, the Executive Director of the Institute for Housing Studies at DePaul University. We're an applied research center based in the Department of Finance and Real Estate in the Business College at DePaul. We collect a lot of data on different aspects of the housing market, produce a lot of different data indicators and applied research that you can see on our website, housingstudies.org. And we work with a lot of folks like Rafael and Martin and others to connect the data that we produce to the different types of work they're doing in the communities across Chicago.
Thanks. David?
I'm David Brent. I'm a principal of Brent Development. We're a Chicago-based developer of affordable housing and have been for 30 years now. I know I look much younger, but it's really been 30 years. We've developed over, I think, 8,000 units of affordable housing. We operate in 15 states around the country, but are headquartered here and have done most of our work in the Chicagoland area. So look forward to telling you a little bit about what we do.
Okay, thanks, David. Megan?
Good evening, everyone. Megan Oswald, a residential real estate broker for the past 17 years, service Uptown quite frequently, but I'm also the current 2021 chair for the Illinois Realtors Affordable Housing Committee.
Great, thanks, Megan. Rafael, I will pull up your presentation and pass it over to you.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you for organizing this webinar, because I'm also part of the Uptown United, and there is always a lot of confusion about what affordable housing is. So I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to the community about what we consider affordable housing from our perspective. As I said at the beginning, I run CMHDC, which was created in 1982, and it became a 501c3 nonprofit corporation in 1997. Right now, we have about $75 million in assets. Buildings range in size from 2 units to 50 units. And our primary focus is the preservation of affordable housing, which is a little bit different from what David does. He builds brand new affordable housing. We preserve buildings. Our goal is to preserve as much affordable housing in areas where there is a real or a threat of displacement of affordable housing. In other words, areas that are gentrifying or changing. We use our own resources to going into communities, buy properties, and retain the buildings as affordable housing. Right now, we have about 750 apartments. We are in Chicago, Evanston, Cicero, and Skokie. And our units are primarily financed privately. We use our own resources, our own equity, and we work with many banks to buy and operate our buildings. Next. So the question is that always come up during our meetings in Uptown United is, what is affordable housing? Technically, affordable housing is a unit where the household pays no more than 30% of his or of the household income. So a family of 2 making $56,000, if they pay $1,000 a month in rent, that's considered an affordable unit. But if they pay $1,700 a month, then they're paying more than 30% of their income. Therefore, the unit is not considered an affordable unit. Now, here is the difference. When we talk about affordable housing, that's housing in the market. And there is always confusion about subsidized housing. Subsidized housing is the housing where it's typically developed using government programs, whether it's the low-income housing tax credit, home money, TIF money, donation tax credit, and the development is typically encumbered by a regulatory agreement that obligates the property owner to comply with income limitations and rent limits. Public housing is another form of subsidized housing. It usually is owned by the public housing agency of a municipality. They don't have to manage it. And these days in Chicago, at least the Chicago Housing Authority usually contracts out with developers and property owners to manage their properties. Residents for public housing must be income eligible as 80% of median income or below. For other subsidized housing, some of those are more restricted, like the low-income housing tax credit requires that the household cannot make more than 60% of median income. And later on, there is a chart that you will see what those income limits are for the city of Chicago, the metropolitan area. Next. Lately, people have been talking about naturally occurring affordable housing and what is known as NOAH. And when I started hearing about that, I got very interested because I said to myself, this is what we have been doing for the last 25 years, that I've been doing for the last 25 years, buying properties in the private sector and retaining them as affordable housing. The properties are not encumbered by a regulatory agreement with a governmental entity unless the property has been financed with public subsidies. And in our portfolio, out of 750 units, we only have 200 units that are either encumbered by a regulatory agreement because it received public subsidies, or we have Section 8 voucher holders. Martin asked me about supportive housing. What is supportive housing? Supportive housing is another way of saying is a subsidized housing, typically because it gets developed through using public funds, but it provides additional services for the tenants. And what is Section 8 voucher? Section 8 voucher, which when people talk about subsidized housing, people think immediately, oh, it's a Section 8 voucher. That's not the case. It could be other sources of funds. But the biggest program is to provide rental subsidies is the Section 8 voucher program. Anybody who is at 80% of median income or below could qualify for the Section 8 voucher. However, there's a long waiting list in Chicago to qualify to get one of those vouchers. There's more demand than the amount of vouchers that we have in the city of Chicago. In Cook County, the Section 8 voucher program is managed by the Cook County Housing Authority. In Chicago, is managed by the Chicago Housing Authority. Typically, the way that it works is that the tenant pays 30% of their income, and the difference in rent is paid by the voucher, by CHA. Next. So here is a comparison of what the subsidized housing development is and what the NOAA is, and pretty much summarizes what I just said. The subsidized housing, think about it either as a way of saying this development is developed with public subsidies, and the property is required to do compliance with income requirements of the occupants, but also it sets the limits on the rents that can be charged. The most restricted, there are some programs that are very restrictive, but the most restricted in my mind is the low-income housing tax credits, because it lowers the requirement, the income requirements, to 60% of median income. There are other programs that require 30%. It depends on what sources of funds are used. The naturally occurring affordable housing could be any property that provides affordable housing. It's not encumbered by governmental regulations. The buildings are not restricted, and they're operated by individual property owners. And Jeff will get into that a little bit, I believe, because his research shows how much of the NOAA affordable units are in Chicago, which are operated primarily in 2 to 6 unit buildings. Next. And this is just to give you an idea of our buildings, and we'll have more pictures later. But currently, we're obligated to provide, just because it's the IRS regulation for a nonprofit, that 75% of our units must be occupied by people at 80% of median income or below. 25% could be unrestricted. And the reason for that is that many years ago, there was this idea of creating mixed income developments. And this was a way for HUD and the IRS to ensure that nonprofit corporations, although they're obligated to provide affordable housing, there will be some flexibility in having some market renters. In our portfolio right now, 48% of the units are occupied by families at 50% of median income. 32% of the units are occupied by families making between 51 and 80% of median income. And 18% of the units are occupied by market renters. So you can see that it's pretty much like an even split between low income and market rates units, including the 80% of median income. Next. I wanted to show this chart because these are the income limits in Chicago for 2021. So if you look, for example, a family of 4, which is typically how we think about affordable housing, whether a unit is affordable to a family of 4, because that includes a couple plus 2 children. So if you make if that family makes $74,550,000, that family will qualify for an affordable unit depending on the program. For tax credits, it will be $55,000, around $55,900 to qualify for one of those units. So there are charts that both the city and the state provide on a yearly basis, so we know that we're in compliance. Again, we don't have to be we're in compliance because we certify voluntarily about our tenants. We check their income on a regular basis, but it's not that we have to report that to the government unless the property has a subsidy of some sort or was built using governmental funds. Next. The City of Chicago, as well as IDA, the Illinois Housing Development Authority, also provides the rent limits. And there are rent limits for different funding sources. And you can see here that is the 60%, the 80%, the home subsidies. It shows what the rents are. And it's, let me look in here my slide so I can see better. If I could say a family of 4 at 60% of median income should be living in a family, in a unit, at 60% is 1,584. That would be considered as 60% of median income. For 80% would be $1,707. So there are charts that are published every year, and we go by that. We, as I said, we do it voluntarily and internally. We don't need to report to the government. David, on the other hand, I think that has, getting to his presentation, but with the tax credits is a completely different story where you have to report back the compliance to the governmental entities. Next. And just to give you an idea of what our buildings look like, these are buildings, small buildings, 6-unit buildings, 30-unit buildings, 50-unit buildings of what is in our portfolio. So when you think about affordable housing, it is the typical Chicago building that we have in our portfolio. Next. Here you see smaller buildings, 2-unit building. The building in the middle is in Uptown, 4700 North Beacon. And that one was financed by the Illinois Housing Authority. So that one is restricted in terms of the income of the families who live there. Next. Now, we do preservation, which means that we do limited rehab in our buildings. And yet this is the kind of unit that we do. We do the kitchens, we do the systems, we do the bathrooms, living rooms, we finish, and then we rent the units at an affordable rent. Next. This is another other pictures of the type of work that we do, and we do it that way because we don't receive capital money to do improvements. So on average, we spend between acquisition and rehab, we spend about $150,000 per unit in order to maintain the rents affordable, because we don't get the capital subsidies that other developers may have in terms of creating brand new construction. And I think that's it for me. And I'll pass it on to Jeff.
Thank you, Rafael. You can jump ahead a couple of slides, I think. The next one too. Yeah, this was good. So Rafael did a great job of providing sort of some general context around the different types of housing that make up the, broadly speaking, affordable universe. You know, one of the challenges that we've identified in our research is that when you think about the affordable housing challenge facing Chicago and facing cities across the country, really it comes down to 2 different factors. One is demand, so that's low-income households, renter households that need to live somewhere, that need to find an affordable housing unit to live in. And then there's that second side, which is the supply of units that are affordable to those low-income households. And what we've seen in our data is really on the demand side, you haven't seen a skyrocketing number of low-income households moving to Chicago or living in Chicago. You've actually seen the number of low-income households decline as the economy has improved since the Great Recession, or as sadly folks might be moving away from the city because of, you know, maybe for various reasons. So the reason that we've seen a growing affordable housing crisis in the city is because of a loss of the affordable supply. And so that's, you know, so one of the key things that we've seen is that between 2012 and 2019, the city of Chicago has lost nearly 10% of its low-cost rental housing stock. And At the same time, the city's actually seen an increase over 4% in its overall rental housing supply. So when you think of all the new housing development that's happening in Uptown or happening downtown or happening in neighborhoods, other neighborhoods across the city, all of that new development is not considered affordable. It's all very expensive. When you think about, some of the other pressures, other market pressures that might cause units that were once affordable to no longer be affordable, you think of, rising demand from, certain types of higher income renter households, moving to neighborhoods along transit or areas with other types of amenities. That demand causes rents to go up in previously affordable areas. Or you also see other types of transformations in the built environment where, as Rafael mentioned, small rental properties, for example, that are two flats are demolished and replaced by single family homes. So in a bunch of different ways, you're seeing an erosion of that affordable supply. At the same time, that you're not seeing a lot of new affordable supply being built. Really, the only new construction is really happening is not affordable. So if you go to the next slide, this is what this looks like in Uptown. So Uptown Rogers Park is a submarket on the North Lakefront. Broadly speaking, it's affordable when compared to the city. So just a few different metrics that we use of the rental housing in the kind of Rogers Park, Edgewater, Uptown submarket. About 44% of the rental units are affordable by the metric that we use to calculate affordability, compared to 40% in the city of Chicago. So there's more affordable supply in Uptown. If you look at the share of households that are considered low income, roughly on par. So the Uptown has about half of the renters in the area in that submarket are considered low income. If you look at the share of those lower income renters that are living in rental units that are and paying more than 30% of their income towards rent, 35%, which is slightly lower than the city average. So by those metrics, Uptown is relatively affordable. But if you go to the next slide, you see some of the challenges. When you look at how these numbers have changed between 2012 to 2019, you see that the overall share of rental units in Uptown that are affordable has declined by 8.5 percentage points. So it's declined faster than the city. If you look at the share of renters that are low income, you see that the share of low income renters has declined by 6 percentage points. So again, that share has declined faster than the city average. And then if you look at the share of the remaining lower income renter households that are now in higher cost units, that share has increased by almost 6.5 percentage points. So you see by these metrics, even though Uptown is affordable, it's losing that affordability more rapidly than the city, and that lost affordability is putting some increased pressure on the remaining lower income renters. If you go to the next slide, so when we think about the supply of housing, what type of housing exists in Uptown and then Rogers Park and Edgewater, sort of the three adjacent neighborhoods. It's largely a large multifamily rental area or condo area. So in Uptown, 53% of the housing units are in 5+ unit rental properties, another 39% are in condos. Very small percentage, 5.7%, are in 2 to 4 unit buildings, and less than 1% are in single family homes. Similar ratios in Edgewater and Rogers Park. When compared to the city of Chicago, it's a little bit more evenly distributed. So Uptown along the lake, high density, either condos or rental properties. So that's important to think of when thinking about the housing context in the neighborhoods. If you go to the next slide, Rafael highlighted a few different types of subsidy programs that help keep housing affordable. And this is just some data on a couple of those. So project-based Section 8 is one of those types of subsidy programs for affordable rental housing that he mentioned in Uptown. Pretty high percentage of total housing units are associated with the project-based Section 8 development, 8.5%. That's much higher than any of the other neighborhoods in the city as a whole. All the way to the right, you see public housing. Again, Uptown has a higher concentration or higher share of public housing units than other adjacent neighborhoods, Edgewater or Rogers Park, about a little bit over 1 percentage point more than the city average. In the housing choice voucher area, a lower percentage of housing units associated with the housing choice voucher. So when you think about where affordable housing comes from, project-based Section 8 public housing in Uptown make up a decent percentage of that affordability. I mean, those are dedicated affordable units, so they're generally speaking thought of as being fairly stable. It's the naturally occurring affordable rental housing supply that Rafael mentioned that is much more vulnerable to market shifts and market changes. So if you go to the next slide, one of the ways that we think about trying to understand this kind of difficult to define naturally occurring affordable rental stock is who owns it. So, you know, in lots of different conversations, one of the key things that has come out is that the folks who have owned their properties for a really long time, these are just property owners who own different types of multifamily buildings. If they've owned their properties for a long period of time, it is likely that the naturally occurring, the existing low-cost rental housing stock comes from that segment of the market, particularly in higher cost or rising cost neighborhoods like Uptown. So what this chart shows is what percent of the 5+ unit rental properties in these different neighborhoods have been owned continuously by the same entity since, say, pre-2000, so at least 20 years. So in Uptown, we see that 56% of the rental buildings have been owned by the same entity for at least 20 years, 61% in Edgewater, 47% in Rogers Park, 47% citywide. So we see that the plurality, or the majority in some cases, of rental properties in these neighborhoods have been owned continuously by the same entities for at least 20 years. But the second biggest category we see is properties that have sold or turned over between 2013 and 2019. So in Uptown, 24%, in Edgewater, 20%, in Rogers Park, 26%. Why this is important is that if you go to the next slide, this shows what the sales price per unit looks like for properties, multifamily properties at different points in time. So in 2000, in 2012, and in 2019, it's all adjusted for inflation. So if you look in Uptown, for example, if somebody bought their property in Uptown, they paid, in 2000, they would have paid about $54,000 a unit for that property. 20 years later, if they're looking to sell that property, the new buyer is going to pay something in the ballpark of $200,000 a unit for that property. So what that means is that all of the financial assumptions that were built into that initial purchase are reset to that new dollar amount, and it makes it very difficult for someone buying a property at $220,000 a unit to keep that unit affordable. So it's that type of turnover that is in part contributing to rising rents in high demand areas like Uptown. And it's part of this type of turnover that erodes that naturally occurring low cost rental housing stock. So with that, I think that's my last slide. So I'll just transition to the next speaker.
Wow, that was really interesting, Jeff. Thanks. I haven't seen that data before. Well, I'm like I said, I'm David Brent from Brent Development, and we've been doing affordable housing development. I've been doing it for 30 years. My company's been in business for almost 26 years now, and we do affordable housing development. We do mixed income development, like Rafael talked about, that has components that are unrestricted, but everything we do is driven by building affordable housing. And we do new construction and rehab. We've probably done over 8,000 units of rental housing now, and mixed income housing, and including master plan communities. And what you see, the pictures you see there at the top, is the community center at Legend South, which is the old Robert Taylor homes that we have redeveloped and are continue to redevelop. And what you see on the bottom is a affordable housing project up in Milwaukee. Next. And these are the states that we operate in now. And part of the reason we operate in all these different states now is the need is everywhere. Affordable housing is not just an issue in Chicago or in Illinois, but it's an enormous issue in states like Colorado, and I don't think Utah's even on there, and DC and Texas and other places. So yeah, thank you. What I've been asked to talk about to you is, I have all this need, and how do you deliver supply? The price of building housing in the Chicagoland area is somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000 a unit. It's just, I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but that's what it costs to build housing here. There's a lot of different reasons for that, but when you're restricting your rents, you have the ability to finance a small portion of them by traditional market financing. And the difference has to be supplied by government programs like low-income housing tax credits or CDBG or home or other programs. And there are limited amounts of dollars, which means there's limited amounts of housing that can be built. And one of the things that we do, and I'll talk about the development process and why it complicates things, but one of the things that we like to do is we like to make housing an economic development contributor to a community. You know, there's plenty of folks that build affordable housing, and they build a building and it serves its purpose. But while we're doing that, we like to make sure that we're adding constructive assets into the community. So like at Legend South, we have a 2-acre operating farm that we run with the Chicago Botanic Gardens, where the residents have food co-ops and the residents have community gardens, and they understand the business of operating food marts. So those are some of the things we do, and we also like to pay attention to architecture. And in our West Haven Park project, which is the old Henry Horner homes, we hired 4 architects, and those architects were all different because we didn't want the next generation of people to look at the old redeveloped Henry Horner homes and say, well, that's the old projects. We wanted them to look at like any neighborhood and say, oh, well, that's just another neighborhood because it has all different architectural elements in it. Those are some of the things that we consider when we're doing projects, and the development process is long and hard. The fastest an affordable project can really be done, a new project, is 18 months from concept to start of construction, and then usually another 18 months to build it. So it's 3 years from concept to delivering housing is probably the fastest that we can provide housing. And costs escalate because you conceive something and you develop a budget for it on day one. You don't close on the financing for 18 months. And I don't know if you've noticed, but construction costs go up. They never go down. They always go up. So you have to try to estimate that. Interest rates often go up. And in the 30 some years that I have been doing this, we've experienced increases in interest rates, which affects all sorts of components of your development. Fortunately, we've had a period of low interest rates. So you start with an acquisition, and you start with gaining site control. That requires resources. Sometimes it requires competition with state agencies that are trying to do things, housing authorities. Then there's community engagement. You know, nobody likes us. It's just an unfortunate part of doing affordable housing because nobody likes change and they don't know what to think. And Rafael talked about, you know, Section 8 and the perception of what Section 8 is and the perception of what public housing is. And it takes a lot of energy to convince folks that we mostly house people that are working. And that's just the reality. Public housing tends to house people that aren't. And we just hire the working poor. Some are really poor and some are a little less poor, but they're working poor and they're struggling to take care of their kids, and they're struggling to find healthcare and be near transportation. So we have to work through that with the community. And then the community everyone is a developer. So everyone tells you how to develop and how big something should be and how it should look. And they're not happy with, this or that. And aldermen defer to the community quite often. So it takes a long time to work with the community, and we're perfectly happy to do that. It just takes a long time. And you have to be responsive to what people's ideas are and what their perceptions of their neighborhood is. And zoning takes 6 to 9 months. So in the city of Chicago, you need to get a property rezoned. That's how long it takes, 9 months. So you conceive the project, you started with the community. It could take 3 to 4 months to get the community support. Then it takes another 6 months to get the rest of the zoning completed. Then it'll take you another 5 months to do your drawings, and it'll take you 6 months after that to get permits. So that's what starts to get you into your 18 months to get something done at its absolute fastest while prices continue to increase. And so that's part of the issue, and part of the due diligence process is then you work with, usually our projects have 5 to 8 tiers of financing to cover that subsidy. So we have 5 to 8 different lenders or investors that we have to accumulate to make a project like that work. And then we have to get them all together and figure out a way that they'll all review everything at the same time and get them closed. And that is another challenge, especially since government regulations are enormous. So every single program has a different set of regulations. You know, you'd think that the government would be able to say, okay, you're gonna do affordable housing, here's everything you have to do, and all the programs will cover these same regulations. But that's not the case because they've all been conceived at different times. And they all try to satisfy different targets. So you have to be facile with that. Then you have to build the project, and you have to hope that you don't have what you have now, which is enormous increase in material costs, which are making things across the country impossible to build. And then finally you get to lease it and then operate it and then comply for the next 35 years with regulations. So you'd be surprised why a lot of people don't want to do affordable housing. It's hard. It's hard, and it takes a long time, and it's difficult to do it well and to make a living. And of course, every time after you've gone through all that, if something goes wrong in the building, you're a villain. So it is a challenging business. I think we're going to experience a very interesting time because for the first time in my career, affordable housing is a buzzword. People, the officials have finally recognized that people can't afford to live in a decent neighborhood and pay a rent that is reasonable. So it looks like a lot of resources going to go into building new affordable housing. And we'll see whether costs just escalate because there's so much demand. And we'll see how we can facilitate getting developments done in neighborhoods that might not otherwise not want to see lower income folks. But it's an interesting, challenging time. And I think we have an opportunity to do some great things. So that's my presentation.
Great, thank you, David. I'm gonna pass it over to Megan.
All right, well, I don't have a PowerPoint. I am pretty much here to talk about and debunk the myth that homeownership, actually home ownership, right? It can be affordable. And the myths that, you know, you need the 20% down or you need a 720 credit score or anything above 700. The fact of the matter is, and just like David mentioned, folks, this affordable housing is a buzzword right now. Everyone's very excited about it, and more lenders are actually building programs to help and assist home buyers actually own a home. And so I'm kind of here to talk about, I can't go into any specific programs, but I am here to say that 3% down or FHA or conventional is a possibility, but also there are grants out there. There's a lot of talk in regards to different areas and census tracts, and that all has to do with the government and city officials that are trying to build up certain areas, make them affordable, but also make them desirable for people to live in again. So they're reinvesting in certain neighborhoods so that folks actually want to live there. When it comes to grocery stores, when it comes to shopping, all of that goes into what makes a neighborhood desirable. And when our census tracts are trying to push and kind of help people buying these areas, there are grants out there up to $30,000 to buy in certain areas, right? And so I'm here to answer any questions that anybody might have and when it comes to actually the purchasing side.
Great. So I think that all of you have presented some wonderful material, and we've got some questions here that people submitted to kind of go a bit further. We've talked about how affordable housing is a huge buzzword these days, and there seems to be some energy around it. And maybe David did speak about it a little bit, but where does the hesitancy or the fear of affordable housing come from within communities?
Rafael, you want to take that on? Or you want me to take that on?
Sure, no, I'll take that on. I think that is the misperception. You know what David mentioned, there is a negative connotation to Section 8, a negative connotation to affordable housing because people think that is very, very poor people. And that's not the case. It's the working families who need affordable housing. So I have the advantage. I have one advantage that David doesn't have. I have the advantage that I could go in the private sector, in the private market, and buy a building, and nobody knows that that building will be affordable housing. David, on the other hand, because his sources of funds are public, they require that they go through an extreme public process where they have to explain to the community everything that they do. So sometimes that creates a friction with what the community wants. Everybody wants a Starbucks, a Whole Foods, but that's not the case in every community. So it's just a matter of the perception of what low-income housing is.
I'll answer that question a little bit. I don't know how many times that I've heard in public meetings, you know, we don't want the people from Robert Taylor and Henry Horner and Cabrini to move into our neighborhood. What they don't understand is, first of all, that's tends not to be the people that we house, but they don't want to move there either. The folks that live in those neighborhoods, that's their neighborhood. They want to stay generally in their own neighborhood. They don't want to be displaced. And so, you know, in general, it's a big socioeconomic problem. Even people that are lower middle class don't want what they view as lower income people coming into their neighborhood and making it unsafe and making it less desirable. They just don't realize that that's not what generally happens in our developments. Our developments end up reflecting what's going on in a neighborhood. So if the neighborhood's high in crime, there's crime around our buildings. Generally, they're not in our buildings. But if the neighborhood isn't high in crime, our buildings don't experience much crime.
It's kind of really interesting because right before I joined Uptown United in the Chamber, I had a meeting with one of the staff at Alderman Kesterman's office, and they were talking about how many people in the community become frustrated by the idea of new development that has affordable housing components. And one of the things that she mentioned to me is that if you own a home and you have a homeowner's exemption on your property taxes, you have received a government subsidy. And so when you look at it, really, there are many multitudes of ownership and living that are subsidized that people don't even take into consideration. But, you know, regularly there are assistance to helping housing be affordable. So that's just kind of one of the things that I thought through.
If I could please add something, Tony, that's the reason why I showed the income table, the income limits table, because there is a perception that affordable and low income housing is for very poor people, and that's not the case. People making 40,000 or 30,000, they will qualify to live in an affordable unit.
So I know that in our industry lately, there is legislation that's come through that's kind of a big deal. It's the Affordable Requirements Ordinance that was just passed last week, which is to create some form of affordable housing requirements here in the Chicagoland area. What are your thoughts on this new ordinance? What are some of the advantages? What are some of the disadvantages? How do you all feel about this?
Jeff, I'm curious what your research shows on whether it'll work.
Well, I mean, I think that it's an improvement in some way. I mean, you know, I think everyone's got their own perspective. I'm curious, like, the developer side of the world too. I mean, I think that there's different perceptions of the potential implications of tweaking the ARO or you know, increasing, you know, certain thresholds. In general, it's, you know, the reason that people pay attention to the ARO is because it's a mechanism that the city has to generate either revenue or require new units to be built. So it's, you know, in an environment where there's not a lot of resources to do that, it is something that that's available, and it does, you know, it's part of, you know, new developments, and so it leverages demand for housing from those, you know, typically high cost new developments. So I think in general, inclusionary zoning types of ordinances are an important tool to create new units and to generate, you know, revenue to support affordable housing. I think that the new ARO proposal, I don't think it was passed. It passed out of committee, I believe. I don't know if it actually passed the city council, but
Okay.
You know, I think it has a number of enhancements. I think one that I particularly thought was interesting is the ability to have an increased ability to invest in offsite affordable units. So I think previously you either had to build units on site or pay into a fund, and doing offsite type developments were a little bit more complicated. And I think that the enhanced ability for the developer to build units offsite or to invest in mission-driven developers to do that type of work, I think is an opportunity to add affordable units in neighborhoods that need it.
So I have a couple thoughts if we have time. So I was involved in the first inclusionary zoning programs in the suburbs and helping some of the communities there in Highland Park and Lake Forest create their programs. So we studied pretty carefully what the impact might be and what the costs were. And, you know, there is a perception that real estate developers, market rate real estate developers, are making so much money that they can afford to put low-income people into their projects. And, you know, that's just not necessarily the case. You know, the projects have to balance, and there's land cost, and there's cost of operations, and they have to be able to raise the money and return money to their investors. But my view on this is, in this case, we'll see, right? So you got to try it to see. I mean, the cost associated with this either has to come from, you know, landowners whose land value may have decreased, or it's going to come from the profits of the developers. And if they can't build because of this restriction, we will experience a decline in supply on the market rate side, and the city will have to address it. But you know, it worked at 10%, and you know, is it going to work at 20%? I don't know. I have no idea. But it might, and if it does, then we have a success. And I just hope they monitor it over a period of 2 to 3 years to see what the impact is, and see if they have to pull it back or modify it a little bit. I'm sure the development community would be screaming if they can't, but that's my thought.
I tend to think I'm not in the development side and the cost that goes into building or anything like that, David. So I completely understand, you know, your thought process. But I think from a community standpoint, I think it's really important. From a real estate standpoint, I think it's really important to, instead of segregating different, you know, households, and instead of segregating them and pushing them into different areas, to be more inclusive. And I think that this concept helps with that. And I think that it's important, like, obviously watch the numbers and kind of see what the building side of it does. But I think, I mean, I'm all for it. I think that it's going to be great for the community.
Right. It doesn't do any good if no housing gets built, because
right. That's what, right. Agreed. And that's what I'm saying. On the making sense to watch it and take a look at it. But the concept and the idea around it, I think makes sense.
Okay. So we've got a question here. What innovations are you seeing that will come to Chicago? For example, microhouses, communities, or co-housing that we are seeing potentially in like cities like Seattle. Do you think those will come to Chicago? Maybe when? Any thoughts?
We already have some little bit of microhousing here. I think it's a bad idea. Personally, it's my own opinion. I don't think it's long-term marketable, because we do have cycles, and when as soon as you have a cycle, whether you can rent a micro unit or a studio or one bedroom, you'll move to a larger unit as things can consolidate. And people do need enough space to survive, you know, because especially look, we just had COVID and they were in their units the whole time. How'd you like to be in 250 square feet of units? It's a little bit different in an environment that is not as seasonal. Like Seattle or like Oregon and others, and the housing, they're landlocked there. They have their land is very limited. They can't build anywhere else. So, and they have the enormous growth. So they have some real issues. Some of the other cohabitation, you know, sort of like dorm, student housing issues are pretty interesting. You know, families living together, sharing common spaces. We're looking at that, and that might be an interesting kind of concept to try to do. We've also looked at things like containers. You know, they're building housing out of old shipping containers, which is cost effective, and we're sort of looking at other means to bring down the cost of housing. But at the same time, as we try to figure that out, there's other needs we have to bring in terms of environmental efficiency, which drive costs up. So.
Okay, so another question that we have is, if you owned a small building and wanting to make units in your building affordable and open to people with Section 8 vouchers, or just to ensure it goes to people who need affordable housing, do you need to register your housing with the city, or is there some other way to make sure that you are really reaching the people you want to?
The answer is no, you don't need to register those buildings with the city of Chicago. The city of Chicago maintains a database of affordable buildings that they finance. But if you don't have public financing, you don't need to do that. You don't need to register the building. It is up to the property owner to market the building, accept Section 8 vouchers, Rejecting a Section 8 voucher holder is illegal, by the way, is not allowed by law. So it is up to the property owner in how the property owner markets the building. That's what we do. We have income limitations. For example, if somebody applies for a unit, we know what the income limitations are. So you can impose, well, I have this unit that I want to rent to a family at 60% or 80 or 100% of median income. You make too much money for me, and I want to preserve this unit as an affordable. That's a legitimate process that the property owner has to implement if they consider that. I will be careful about fair housing rules, but I don't think, first of all, you cannot discriminate against somebody because they have a Section 8 voucher, but I think that you can impose your own regulations in operating your building to say, I want this building to be affordable. These are my rents, and these are the people that I want in terms of the income limits. You can still not discriminate for other reasons.
Yep. I get calls all the time for, listings and rentals, and do you just accept Section 8? And I tell them all the time, absolutely. And if someone tells you that they don't, then they need to be reported, to be quite honest, right?
Right.
And so the way that I look at it, if someone really wants to target market, maybe voucher holders, again, the big thing would be, I know some landlords that I have worked with have just gone down to the center and advertised their buildings there, right? Or just make sure that they're reaching the neighborhoods if they're in a certain neighborhood, as long as they're advertising out there, and just making sure that they do not, they don't say no. And the big thing, like Rafael was saying, is that the building, the unit has to be approved. So as long as the owner or landlord is open to making those improvements or making sure that it passes Section 8 restrictions, then there's no reason that they can't be qualified.
But a point of clarification, it has to be approved by the housing authority or whoever manages the Section 8 program. It's not the city that approves that.
Right, correct.
Okay, and another question we have here is asking, David, you'd mentioned that it can cost around $300,000 per unit or more to do new construction development. And this person would like to know whether there are any local or state or governmental policies that can help reduce these costs to incentivize people or developers to do affordable housing construction.
I wish. It's actually, they don't mean to, but it's the opposite. It's because there's federal programs, they want everything. They want, the city of Chicago dictates the size of the bedrooms, even if the marketplace doesn't, how much storage has to be in the units, what the exteriors look like, what amenities have to be in the buildings, what kind of green technologies, levels you have to get to. And those are all great things. And we do all those, and we do them gladly because they make for better buildings, but they're costly. So if you wanted to build just housing, just get housing so people could live there, there would probably be some ways to do it. It wouldn't be, it wouldn't have some of the things that have been deemed to be critical for people to live in. So we keep trying to figure out ways to lower costs, and so we can build more units. The reality of these projects is that if you have $10 million to build a project, and say you can piece those costs together, and if the cost is $300,000, I can build whatever. God, I can only build 30 units with that, but 33 units with that. But if you have 30 million, if it only costs 200,000, you can build 50 units. So we don't care as developers. We want to build more units. It doesn't really mean anything to us to build fewer units. As a matter of fact, it's worse because you want a certain critical mass to operate the building well. You'd like to have a full-time janitor, and you want to have a full-time maintenance manager on the property so that the property can be run well.
And just a point of clarification on that question, because I get the perception that this person, I think that is Todd or Kumar, was thinking that $300,000 to $500,000 was for the market rate construction. It's the other way around. The government imposes so many regulations and requirements that it makes the affordable units be somewhere between $300,000 to $500,000. Is that correct, David?
Yeah, unfortunately it is.
It is. And that's why I think that is so critical to start thinking about preservation of affordable housing in existing buildings that do not require all the expenses and all the amenities that a brand new construction has.
Yeah, we need both. We absolutely need both. But unfortunately, unless you have organizations like Rafael's that can buy those buildings, or like community or land trusts that'll buy the buildings, marketplaces tend to, neighborhoods get popular, rents go up. People, they take advantage of it. And, the Section 8 idea is typically Section 8 will have a limit on how much they'll pay for rent. And that is a reason why a Section 8 wouldn't be accepted somewhere. I think that's a legal reason, although they have the right to pay more rent. So once your rents get up to $2,000 or $3,000, a month, you can't take it, Section 8 can't pay for it. So it becomes unaffordable.
Martin, is there time for one more question? Okay. One question that came through is we are hearing about what are other cities doing to help create NOAA property groups that Chicago is not doing? What are some ideas that we could potentially implement here to help create natural, affordable housing?
I think that I don't know what other cities are doing. Let me be frank here. I know that there is an emphasis now in Chicago to preserve more affordable housing. If there is anything that the pandemic has done, is to give an opportunity to governmental entities to talk to housing providers who provide affordable housing, and they're in trouble because people are not paying their rents. So there is an emphasis now in the city of Chicago and in the state of Illinois to work with NOAA providers to assist them and make sure that they thrive by providing affordable housing. I don't know what other cities are doing, but I think in Chicago, I know that CMHDC, my organization, is probably one of the few nonprofit entities that do that. Most other nonprofit entities do different type of transactions. But the reality is that individual property owners, they provide NOAA without knowing that they're providing NOAA.
Yeah, just, I think, and Rafael, I'm sure knows this better than I do, but, I think just some of the challenges that face these property owners are challenges around property maintenance, challenges around property management, challenges around improving the property. And so resources to help defray those costs, to help keep those costs low are important. There are existing resources here in Chicago that do that kind of stuff, but I think that having places like Rafael, like CMHDC, supporting those types of organizations, creating a fund or some type of resource that can be deployed to acquire properties as they come on the market, and with the intent of keeping those properties affordable. I mean, those are ideas that people have talked about in different contexts, but they require resources and whatnot, which is always a trick. But as Rafael noted, a lot of this makes up the big portion of the overall rental stock. It's people are paying a lot of attention to it right now because there's not enough resources to build new subsidized units. They're really expensive to build anyways, and so how do we keep the stuff that we have affordable already? Keep it affordable and preserve it as affordable. That's why the NOAA conversation has really picked up a lot of steam over the last few years.
And actually, Chicago's actually leading the way on a lot of ways. They have community land trusts that are buying up property, giving them away for free. They do facade programs, they do subsidy programs. So Chicago, and often, and has been for at least the 30 years I've been involved, they've been the leaders in affordable housing around the country.
I agree.
Okay. Well, it is already 7 o'clock. I'm not sure whether we wanted to go over, or Martin, if you want to conclude us, it's totally up to you.
Yeah, just really want to, Tony, thank you for helping plan this webinar and moderate the Q&A. Want to thank Megan, Jeff, David, and Rafael for joining us and giving their time on a beautiful Tuesday evening here. in Chicago. I know in the spring it's hard to stay inside on nice evenings. Just real quick to wrap up, I just wanted to share a few things. Just so you all know, here's a link to some of the folks that presented today. Check out their websites. Also, just put a link for the Chicago Department of Housing website on there. And then just thank you all for coming and learning. Please tell your friends. We hope to post this on our website soon so that if you know somebody who missed it or could use this information, they can watch the webinar after the fact. It'll be up on our website at exploreuptown.org. So big thanks to all of our panelists. And we hope to see you at an event in the near future. Go to our website and see what else we have coming up.